U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is looking to bring Iranian exports to zero. The U.S. is moving to stop all countries around the world from purchasing Iranian oil. Now, to talk about this and other big stories from around the globe is our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari, joining me from Los Angeles. Lisa, will most countries stay away from Iranian oil?
Well, it's going to be hard because I'm sure Iran will invite them to buy the oil with very high incentives, very low prices, which it's done. And many countries, including India and China and Iraq, have not heeded to the global, warnings of not purchasing oil from Iran and have gone for the low prices. And this can only go so far, but it's definitely a very, very targeted measure to curb Iran's income. It's almost been a year since the United States decided to pull out of the Iran nuclear deal. It was last May that Donald Trump, he ran on the campaigned on pulling out of the Iran deal and did, in fact, do so. And then, since then have the U.S. has been looking for ways to target and really strangle the Iranian economy in a way that affects the government more than the people. And I think this is probably the best way to do so.
And oil has spiked to a 6-month high after the Trump crackdown on Iran.
Sure. So it's a supply-demand equation here, and if you're going to shut down one supply source, you spike the others. So the world still goes on, and people still need oil. And like you said, there will be those who still continue to purchase oil from Iran, but there will be many who will not.
Iran has threatened to close the Strait of Hormuz after the U.S. and sanction waivers. Iraq, Saudi Arabia are ready to up oil output as the U.S. cuts off Iran waivers. Tell me more about that.
Sure. So it is every man for himself. Everybody's basically doing what they can to take advantage of the situation. So with Iran, it's more the war of words. They threaten to close off the Strait of Hormuz because that's what they can do in order to choke off the global economy. They have access to the strait where East meets West, and they do this all the time where they threaten to shut down the strait. Meanwhile, you have other oil outputters saying, don't worry, we'll pick up the global slack here. We'll put out more oil so that consumers don't have to buy from Iran. How gracious of everyone to offer to do so. But everyone's looking to make that buck. And they'll do it at the expense of others. So now this is good news for those who are selling oil and can kind of make extra profit here.
Lisa, tragedy on Easter Sunday as churches and hotels were bombed in Sri Lanka. The latest death toll is over 300, with more than 500 people injured. Police are investigating the attacks that may have been from an obscure local Islamist group. Tell me more about that.
Right. So all eyes were on this local Islamic group. They thought, well, it couldn't just be this local group because this is a very sophisticated attack. Think about it. 3 hotels, 3 churches, all simultaneous, all on Easter Sunday. This is almost, a 9/11 scale attack. So authorities knew that this is coming from something much bigger. And of course, today, ISIS claimed responsibility. And now we know that it's coming or was directed maybe to a local group, but from a higher source. This happens very often. And unfortunately, it's because you have recruits and volunteers in all parts of the world willing to blow themselves up in the name of Islamic terrorism. In this case, it's horrific details that come out. Like you said, a very high death toll, very high number of those injured. That number continues to climb. And you hear these details about one of the suicide bombers, for example, in the hotel, standing in line at the buffet for breakfast that very morning, trying to blend in with the crowd. Horrific. It's just horrific. And of course, whether we call this homegrown or we call this a large-scale ISIS attack, doesn't take away from the reality of the situation that they're still looking to do this. As much as we can talk about ISIS being on the decline, as they are physically in terms of their land and their caliphate in Iraq and in Syria in particular, these attacks still continue.
Now, some news agencies are reporting these bombings are retaliation for the mosque shootings in Christchurch, New Zealand. But do we know for sure?
Sure. So, that could be the case, and I'm hearing the same, chatter that you are. But do they really need a justification? Have they needed a justification from in the past when all of these different attacks go on in all parts of the world, small or large, whether the death toll is 800? They don't need a justification. And should they want to connect the 2 points is to say, well, Muslims died. Well, you know what? It's not Christian, terrorism. It happens. It's not a thing. It's not an epidemic, though. And I think that that's where we have to be very careful. Of course, every single attack is horrific, whether it's in a church or a mosque or a synagogue. But when there's an epidemic, and we can stop that epidemic by being more specific and targeting that epidemic than we should. In this case, for example, authorities had gotten warning that there will be attacks by an Islamic group on Easter Sunday. But that warning, those threats, were not passed on to the prime minister. They weren't passed on to the higher powers in order to really take this threat seriously. And look where it landed them. I think that this is a part of a much larger conversation. Unfortunately, we're still having this conversation after so many years of suffering through this type of terrorism. We had it here in the United States. I know Canada has had its fair share of one-offs, as they call them, but they're not one-offs. This is part of a much larger plan and recruitment plan, and they're doing it online. They don't need the caliphate. They don't need that land in order to find these volunteers that are willing to kill innocent people.
Yeah, I was in Ottawa in 2014 when there was the lone wolf attack on Parliament Hill when Zahef Bebo shot Nathan Cirillo from the Hamilton Argylls 3 times in the back. He was unarmed, standing at the National War Memorial. It was very tragic, and I was there to cover that as well. Now, there are warnings that ISIS or Al-Qaeda may carry out more attacks of Catholic churches. Are these just empty threats or more terrorist attacks on the way, Lisa?
There has been a fixation over the last decade or so on this, war on Christians, as we've called it. And why is that? It's because in certain parts of the world, many, many individuals are turning to Christianity as a place where they could find solace, and they can find peace, and they can find meditation, and they can find a religion that they can relate to. We talk about globalization in the form of social media and eBay and Amazon bringing the world together, but it's also brought people closer to that Western form of worship, which they could relate to perhaps in a way that's more modern and more suited to their lifestyles. And we see this very often in places like Iraq and Iran, where people have to worship in underground churches because it's actually forbidden for Muslims to turn from Islam and turn to Christianity or convert to Christianity. Should we take this threat as just another threat or empty words? I don't think so. I think that it's very, very important to heed their threats. And, I was on a radio show yesterday, and the host pointed out that, unfortunately, and I hate to say this, and he said the same thing, governments don't really have an incentive to protect their churches. They have an incentive to protect their, tourist sites and places where, will drive down tourism. In this case, 3 hotels were hit. But do they really have the incentive to protect the churches and synagogues and even mosques, places of worship that are, nonprofit centers, places where people go to pray? What's the incentive besides for saving innocent lives? And that should be obviously incentive enough. But this is a real thing, and especially in these parts of the world, we should really take focus, and hopefully there will be more security, more protection, and more attention paid.
Amen to that. Now, the Voice of America is reporting that the United States and the Taliban see no reason to slow down Afghan peace talks. Let's talk more about that.
It's interesting. Where has it gotten us so far, but they don't want to slow down? We're going nowhere very fast, so they want to continue doing so. I think for the U.S., this becomes an issue of just putting things to rest if they can. And that is such a pipe dream in the case of Afghanistan that has been a war-torn, precarious state for so many generations. It's not just the past few years. And of course, the U.S. is withdrawing from Afghanistan. We don't want to leave a mess, but mess it is. I think it's going to take many years before the people of Afghanistan can nation build and create a stable society in which they could have the security that they need. And now we're in talks with the Taliban to create that stability. It's like what we have with the Palestinians. We have Hamas in place in order to lead and guide and govern the Palestinians. And it's been horrific. It's been awful. It's been, a terror organization basically leading a people to more terror and more strife and more hunger and all of that. So I don't see this going anywhere productive, but the U.S. doesn't want to stop. They want to continue going with these talks to see if they can perhaps come to some sort of resolution before they call it quits.
Lisa, let's talk about Israel versus Palestine. The Trump administration is discouraging the use of a two-state solution, and the PLO is discussing revoking Israel recognition, ending a security coordination.
Right, so they call it Israel and the Palestinian territories. There's no Palestine as of now, and in going forward with the peace plan, the U.S. has leaked this information almost. We don't know much about the peace plan. We know that Jared Kushner has said that this will require both sides to make concessions that they may not want to make, but it will put them at a place that will create more progress than we've seen before. And we know that every generation, every president has sought to create peace between the Palestinian people and Israel, and it has not worked. This has been, an ongoing battle. It seems like nothing's enough, and no concessions will ever get them the peace that they want. But that being said, there's been, a lot of fire exchange on both sides. Hamas going back to business as usual and firing missiles into civilian areas from Gaza into Israel. And Israel having to retaliate or answer those shots. And, again, an ongoing, very, very vicious cycle. But we're promised that we're going to get something good from the White House. And Jared Kushner said he's cooking something good. So we'll see what that entails.
We've had our issues here in Canada with illegal or irregular border crossers from upstate New York into Quebec. Now, U.S. President Donald Trump has ordered a crackdown on visa overstays in the latest push against illegal immigration where you are.
Yes. So obviously, the numbers are telling a very, very, very different reality from what people in the United States think about U.S. immigration. The perception right now, and maybe that's because of the mainstream media, is that Donald Trump has basically, with an iron fist, shut down all immigration, meaning there's nobody here on visa, there's nobody here on a tourist visa, there's nobody here on a student visa, there's nobody here from a Muslim country because we have a Muslim ban in place, there's nobody here crossing the border, and these are all false. There are numbers to prove the fact that we have a lot of illegal immigrants still coming through. We have a lot of people overstaying their visas, and this crackdown is meant to really vet out people like what we saw in the Boston Marathon bombing. We just passed another anniversary of that attack, where you have people who came in on a visa, overstayed their visas, and no one checked in on them. There were red flags. No one saw them. So this is, again, in an effort to create more security, to vet individuals who are here, to create a system where people follow the rules, where we have immigrants that are legal, not illegal. And this is the nuances that are totally sidestepped and really blurred in the media here in the United States. And it's very, very unfortunate because we do have a beautiful country of immigrants, but, the way that things are going, it's become very polarized, where one side thinks that you have to open up all the borders and let anybody and everybody and anybody who has a desire should be let in. And the other side is portrayed as not letting anybody in, not even those who are refugees or have a humanitarian case or a story. So the truth always lies within those two extremes. And in this case, it's in fact that.
The Mexican police crackdown on migrant caravan is one of the largest single raids since the mass exodus began. And Lisa, Arizona's mayor has even declared a state of emergency amid the immigration crisis.
Exactly. So this is the reality that goes on at the border. Many people visiting the border to see that reality. And Donald Trump did that actually a couple of weeks ago, going down to the border to see the reality. I was at a meeting about 2 weeks ago, and the governor of Texas spoke, and he made the same plea that the reality on the ground is totally different. Those who live on or near the border can't deal or can't live with this reality of these immigrants pushing through. And when you have a state like Arizona calling for a state of emergency, that tells a bigger and better and more accurate picture of what's going on. Mexico had to do the same thing. You look at, a country like Mexico that's able to absorb perhaps more and differently immigrants from Latin America, same continent, same language. There'd be less of that kind of assimilation process. More jobs, et cetera, and you don't see that. You see them also having to deal with a reality. Again, what we see in philosophy and what we see in reality are two very different things. But these stories, Hal, that you just read, these headlines tell the accurate portrayal of what's going on the border.
Our foreign affairs and ISIS expert, Lisa Daftari, joining me once again from Los Angeles via Skype. Thanks so much, Lisa.
My pleasure.
On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, be well, have a great day.